For your patience this morning. There was a little bit of confusion with the registration page for the online process. That has now been resolved, so we do have folks present here and online. I will ask the staff to the council for confirmation that we have quorum, and as soon as I have that, we'll get started. All right. Thank you all very much for attending this Procurement Council meeting for November 3rd. We're going to just go around quickly. I have been informed that we have quorum, but we'll do attendance. We'll do this by the roll, so I'll call everybody's name out. If you are participating by teleconference or by phone, we'll certainly pause to give you enough time to unmute and to speak. If we do miss you, please let us know, and we'll double check that at the end. So I'm here. That's always good to know. Office of the State Comptroller, Patricia Warrington? Not yet? Okay, great. Division of the Budget, Jason DiGianni? Great, thank you. Dwight Flynn, Chief Diversity Office.
Lonnie Barron here on behalf of.
Great, thank you, Lonnie. Ag and Markets, Lisa Brooks. Okay, Docs, Paul Gannett. Great, thank you, Paul. DOH, Andy Ruby.
Hi, Sean. I'm here. Thank you.
Hey, Andy. ITS, Elaine Blanchett. Great, present. Thank you. OMH, Bill Gwynn. Present. OPWDD, Deborah Greco. Okay. Hear her yet. Tom Hipchin from SUNY.
Here.
Great, thank you. Kara Wallace, legislative appointee.
I'm here.
Great, thank you, Kara. Jackie Brilling, so here in the room. And Sean Cullinane, are you on the line also?
I'm here.
Great. It sounded like we just had someone join. Did a member of the council just join?
Yes, Deb Greco from OPWDD.
Great. Thanks, Deb. Sorry for the difficulty getting into the system today. Did Lisa Brooks or Patty Warrington have a chance to join? Lisa is on. Okay, great. Hi, Lisa. All right. Are there any council members who have joined us that have not been identified yet?
Empire State Development, Sean. It's Chris McCann.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Okay. Great. So it looks like even though we have one person who confirmed not here, we definitely have quorum. That's great. So we'll move on to old business. The primary old business in front of the council is the meeting minutes from September 22nd, 2021. So first we'll take, thank you. First we'll take a motion to consider them. Is there a motion to consider the minutes?
So moved.
From Jackie Brilling, thank you. And a second to consider the minutes? Great. Paul, Thank you. So is there any comments, edits, changes to the meeting minutes that the council would like to see brought up, or are there any discussion about the minutes? I'm seeing none in the room. I'll take a pause. Are we seeing any in the chat or on the phone for folks participating by remote? Okay, seeing none. Did a council member just join?
Hi, this is Patty Warrington, just joining.
Great, thank you, Patty. We were just getting ready to take a vote on the meeting minutes from September 22nd. So we have a motion, we have a second, we have no comments or changes. So the chair will just ask you to signify. Sort of in the room, you can raise your hand or say aye. On the phone, we'd like you just to say aye, please, to approve the minutes from September 22nd. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Great. So procedurally, particularly because we're on the phone and on video, it's way more important for us to know if there's anybody who objects. Are there any no votes on approving the minutes?
Welcome to WebEx. Enter your access code.
I will assume that's not an objection. Okay.
Enter your attendee ID number, followed by pound.
Got it. Danny, you still hearing us? Okay. So I believe a member of the council has their speakers on, and they're both hearing me and sending my words back. That seems to be better. Okay, great. Thank you for that. So hearing no objections, the motion passes. The meeting minutes pass for September 22nd. I love starting a meeting with big success, unanimous success. Thank you. The rules work group, obviously, there is a voting item down below on the potential rules for the Procurement Council. So rather than do an update here, I will give you sort of an update and an executive summary of the materials that have been submitted when it comes time for the voting item. We'll move immediately on to Mark Hiller for legislative updates.
We have nothing to report for legislative updates, Sean.
Great, thank you. We'll then go to our standing reports. Sean Hume from OGS, please.
Regarding the preferred source commodity applications for new offerings approved under OGS Standing Authority, as of November 2nd, 2021, OGS has not approved any items under its standing authority since the last report given on September 22nd, 2021. And in regards to NICEAD's report of mail fulfillment, on October 21st, 2021, the Procurement Council received NICEAD's report on mail fulfillment. A copy of that report has been distributed to the council members and has been posted to the Procurement Council website.
And as always, NICEAD is always present to answer questions if there are any about that mail fulfillment document. Are there any questions from the council regarding that? Okay. Hearing none, we can always revisit it if we have to. So that brings us primarily to the new business item. On a previous agenda, you will have seen that there was a to be determined on the kinds of presentations we usually do. There were some scheduling conflicts that prevented that. So we'll jump right into new business. I will ask, though, that if the council has any specific things they would like us to schedule presentations on, we would be very anxious to take that guidance and try to get those speakers. I would also suggest that if there's any council members or their agencies that does have something that is relevant to the Procurement Council and they would like to share it, we certainly would be open to having those sessions include as many council members as possible over time. So thank you all for that. So under new business, the rules work group was established by the chair. So it is added onto the agenda by the chair, so I'll speak on behalf of it. I guess, so a quick history. So I've been here and operated as the representative for the commissioner of OGS for about 5.5 years. There have been a number of all awesome meetings, but several meetings that have created great, passionate advocacy on multiple sides. And out of that came a series of questions which the rules document is intended to address. So early on when I was here, one of the big issues that the council members had been raising was that all business that appears in front of the council should really be presented in advance, provided with enough opportunity for the council members to review. That is something that we wanted to codify to make sure that council members could rely on that going forward. The next was that business was conducted efficiently by the council in a manner that prioritizes council member time and opportunities for inquiry. Part of the issue was to make sure that and we'll talk a little bit about this because there was a question on the work group about timing, but we wanted to make sure that speakers knew what was expected of them, knew that there was a time expectation on them, and that there was plenty of time left for council questions, for council discussion, and ultimately for the thoughtful approach to any voting items that came before the council. There was a request that all the rules be known and uniform. And that was also something that was attempted to be achieved through the rules that are in front of you today. So there are two documents. There's a document entitled Procurement Council Rules Draft 11420. There have been a few modifications since then, but that is Dan, that's still the date on the top, right, of the current document? Okay. There have been some adjustments since then, but that does give you a sense of how hard the Rules Committee was working before many of our agencies got all consumed with certainly the activities of the last 20 months. So the intent is just to, there's a section on administrative rules. That section is primarily just to clarify that we are subject to open meetings law, to give the chair the ability to speak with council members or the staff in OGS and really define roles so that communication to the council can be codified, so that it's very clear to all council members when they have a question or when they have a concern or when they want to consider putting something on the agenda, what the process is for that. It does reserve the right to establish work groups. This council has some very finite rules about quorum and majority, and we'll talk about that in a minute. That's the reason why we were recommending that most of the work that isn't done at these meetings is done in a work group, not in a committee, because a committee would require additional forms of quorum and additional, we still expect that the work groups would report back to the council and that only the council would be able to take action on them and implementing those changes. So that's the reason there's a work group section there. The attendance section, I apologize for anybody who bristled when they saw that. That has nothing to do with any person who's been on the council in the last 2.5 years. When I joined the council, there was a council member that had not ever attended. And we just wanted the ability to make recommendations to the appointing authorities if there are big gaps in attendance, particularly related to the quorum requirement, because the quorum requirement and the majority requirement are fairly substantive for this council. The one I skipped was agendas and materials. Agendas and materials are specifically to address that all business up here is presented to you in advance. It does recommend that agenda items be finalized 10 days out. The second, and there is a second section, we'll talk about section 3 also of the proposed rules, That is the other section that's geared towards advance notice for sort of formatting discussion on items. Under the voting rules, so this is where we wanted to talk about the quorum. So because when the Procurement Council was established, there were no specific quorum rules or majority rules established. The governing law is General Construction Law, Section 41. It governs both quorum and majority, and it requires that more than 50% of the members be present to act at all, right? So that's quorum, but it also, and that number is 11. It also requires that majority to act in the affirmative for this council is 11. It is a majority of all seated council members. It is not a majority of the folks in attendance at any particular meeting. That has in the past created real confusion. So we've included it in here so there won't be any confusion in the future. And certainly if there was a statutory change either to general construction law or a statutory change to the statute creating the Procurement Council, we would come back and address that at that time. So that's why that's there. Section 3 is, well, so let me stop for a minute. Questions on the administrative sections or the statutory rules for quorum and majority? I don't see any in the room. Any on the phone?
Sean, this is Tom Hipshin. I just want to clarify, the only way to make a change to the voting, not the quorum, but the voting would be through legislative change?
Yeah, that's our understanding. So we went through a full legal review of this when it came up as a question in several consecutive meetings several years ago. And because of the absence of instructions on majority and quorum in the establishing legislation, anyone without rules in their establishing legislation rolls to General Construction Law, Section 41, and it highlights both quorum and majority being more than 50% of the seated members. So yes, Tom, that is our understanding. It would require a legislative change. It's not something the council can do for itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other on the phone comments? Questions? Okay. Item 3 is about proposing business for consideration for the council. As all of you know, when you went through your onboarding process to the council, in addition to having to do an ethics filing and doing those disclosures, you would have been shown the establishing legislation, which is State Finance Law 161. There are a series of actions the council can consider. This really is to give everybody a path and answer what has been a recurring question for us, which is how does a council member propose something to come in front of the council? Section A really is about the responsibilities of the chair and staff to the council, which right now are entirely supported by the OGS team. That will take care of the things that are statutory, the things that are required to be on the agenda, the things that you have seen on each agenda that we have brought forward for you, right? Each of the reporting requirements, legislative updates, those sorts of things. We'll also take care of sort of the macro issues, the results of big major work groups, those sorts of things in terms of publishing that to the agenda. Beyond that, if council members wish to propose an action, what we're recommending is that they put a proposal in and it says to the clerk of the council, that's established under administrative rules. Under A, it allows me to designate someone to be the point of contact for that, called the clerk of the council. So we would recommend that proposals would come in no later than 14 days prior to the next upcoming meeting, and that the proposals would include an actual copy of the proposal, an executive summary of the proposal, justification, explanation, supporting documents, And then we would like it to come in, or at least the Rules Committee and what's being proposed is that it would come in with obviously the name of the person who's going to sponsor, but also the name and contact information of the second, so that it has already been socialized to a point among the council members that there are at least 2 members of the council that see that it has a path to be presented and should come before the council. We would then work with any member, so certainly, the OGS staff to the council, myself, we would be available to help you get it into the right format or to take a look at it when it comes in, give you any feedback if there's any gaps on the statutory obligations. The biggest thing will be, is it within the council's authority to do, right? So if it is within the council's authority, then we'll want to just talk to you about form and content. Again, the statutory authority of the council is State Finance Law 161. So that would be the recommendation from the rules group. So I'm going to stop there before talking about the discussion rules because I know there's a question about those. But for item number 3, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have just concerns about whether that's not enough information when a proposal comes forward from a council member? Too much information? I see no feedback in the room. Is there any feedback on the phone?
Hi, Sean, this is Patty Warrington. I just have a question about the, does that proposal about actions to be considered, is that applied to proposals that would be added to the agenda by you as well when you're putting together the agenda?
Yeah, the expectation is that it absolutely should apply to us also. So in this case, I'm doing a full walkthrough of the rules, right? So I didn't provide an executive summary, but I do believe that the expectation would be on all things coming before the council, including being presented by the chair going forward.
Thank you.
Yep. And there's no exclusion in the language. So it's all council members who wish to propose an action. The chair is a council member, so that has been our current interpretation. However, if the council has an expectation of clarity on that, that would be an opportunity for amending the rules if that was important. Okay? So basically, as we discuss this, if there are housekeeping changes, and we certainly could consider that a housekeeping change or a clarification, if there's housekeeping changes, we'll take all of those, make those as we go, and the hope is those housekeeping changes will be included when we vote on the rules. If there are major substantive changes, we'll consider those as amendments because this is a voting item in front of the council. So we'll walk through that as we get to the bottom of this. Any other questions yet? Okay. So the intent on discussion rules was for everybody to sort of have a fair but limited opportunity to make their presentations. I think we've all been present for presentations that have been 45 minutes or an hour long on different items. I apologize. Not all of us have been on the council for those things, but some of us have been. So I think that was the intention. The rules work group had some questions about maintaining some flexibility. So specific, very complicated subjects may need additional consideration or additional time. So what I'd like to do is just walk you through what your current draft says and then what the feedback was from some of the members of the rules work group. And then that'll be obviously for discussion among the group. Under the proposals, basically the idea would be that each speaker would, the proposer would be able to, or the sponsor would be able to speak on behalf of the proposal. In the event that it was a preferred source proposal that was being vetted, there is a requirement that OGS and ESD both opine on the subject and identify that the proposal has been vetted through both of those mechanisms. So the expectation in that case would be that OGS and ESD would both be considered speakers under the same rules. So there would be a speaker, a sponsor speaker, where in a preferred source case, it would probably be the preferred source who brought that and made that presentation. And then there would be the required reporting from OGS and the required reporting from ESD, each of which would have a limit on the speaker time in the same way that any of the proposers would. And that's characterized in limited to 7 minutes in section 3. One of the recommendations from the procurement, from the work group, was to allow the chair to have flexibility for complicated subjects, to allow a speaker to be expanded to, the proposal was to be expanded to 10 minutes. You know, certainly if the council wants there to be flexibility, we can incorporate that. And then the idea was, though, that it wouldn't be day of. It would be the speaker would have to raise the issue in advance. So Jackie Brilling was kind enough to write some draft language. I will share that with everybody. And then when I'm done presenting, I think when we get into discussion, that'll be one of the main topics of discussion, along with anything else the council wants to raise. So the proposed change would be presenters should limit presentations to 7 minutes. However, the chair may grant extensions of time of up to total 10 minutes upon 14 days advance request from the presenter, which would mean basically when they put their proposal in, they would have to identify that it was very complicated. They thought they were going to need more time to properly explain to the council. And then they would request that added time, and then we would have the discretion to do that. So plenty of opportunity for discussion about that. Just real quickly, the idea on the council entering discussion, we thought it was appropriate for council members to have as many opportunities to speak and ask questions as possible, but not to take the first 25 minutes for any one council member. So to say the council member would be limited to 3 minutes, 2 questions, the follow-ups that go along with those questions, with no limit to the number of times you can get on the speakers list, but with an expectation that you would speak and ask some questions, let other folks participate in the discussion, and then come back around on the speakers list. So that's why it was proposed that way, certainly for discussion. And then the hope would be that if there were supporters or people with concerns in advance during the advance review, that they would provide that feedback to their fellow council members, and that feedback could then be incorporated into the questions and discussion that council members would discuss live during the meeting. There's no requirement of that. It just says where possible in advance. And it's really a matter of having council members have as broad an understanding of any subject as possible before coming to the meeting. That does not limit your ability to raise new items or anything else during the meeting. So let me stop there because most of the rest of this is going to be fairly pro forma. I'll be able to brief it in a minute. Are there any questions right now, or we'll do another call for discussion and debate in a minute? I don't see any in the room. Are there any questions or additional input from the phone right now? Okay, so real quickly, guest speakers, we were recommending that we put a cap on guest speakers also, just out of respect for the scheduled time for this meeting. That proposal is limited to 15 minutes. Again, if there was a need to be flexible, that's open for discussion to the council. We thought that was a pretty good time to hold speakers to. If you do have comments, the hope would be that you would provide comments within 48 hours of the meeting so that we had enough time to distribute it to the council members. again, doesn't limit your ability to discuss during the meeting, but the hope was to have everybody have as broad an understanding of a subject as possible. And then there's effective dates. So basically, the idea was that these rules would take effect at the end of the meeting. Should you approve it today, they would take effect at the end of the meeting today, with the exception of if there was any reason why the chair needed to appoint a sergeant at arms or a clerk or someone immediately, I would be able to do that during the meeting. The chair has no intention of doing that, so that's holdover language. So, you know, it just as simple to make it completely effective at the end of the meeting. And then modification of the rules, basically the work group will get back together periodically. We didn't set a specific time. Again, there's only 4 formal meetings a year for the council. I'd like to see how the rules work. But they can get back together periodically and they can make recommendations for modifications. And the modifications can be proposed either by the chair or by a council member following the rules, right? You can change the rules by following the rules by putting a proposal on the agenda. And then the council can decide either to take that up on their own or to ask the rules work group to convene to discuss the proposal. Lastly, there's some exhibits. Exhibit A is a set of motion rules, which we've had a request to clarify, and I will talk about that in a minute. The second one there basically says that the rules, right, Procurement Council rules draft, which would become Procurement Council rules as approved, would be first in the order of precedent, then the Exhibit A would be second, and then a very specific reference to Robert's Rules of Order would be third. That way, if there is a discussion about how Robert's Rules applies to this meeting, it would be a specific version so that everybody was navigating the same rules at the same time. So the proposed change, the proposed housekeeping change, in the first paragraph, the first item on Exhibit A is quorum and majority. The last sentence has been identified as confusing. So it reads right now, therefore, the Procurement Council requires a quorum of 11 members to act and a majority of 11 members for a motion to pass. That was intended to mean 11 for quorum and intended to mean, it was intended to mean 11 for quorum and 11 for majority. But the feedback we got is that because it was majority of 11, it raises the issue of whether majority was 11 or majority was 6. So to clarify that, we basically would be...
That's what the general construction
So we basically would be using the same language in item number 2 under the rules, which basically would say for a motion to pass, it must receive approval by a majority of the total number of Procurement Council members, at least 11. So we would consider that a housekeeping issue. It's not change to the statute or anything else, but we would just make the 2 documents consistent. So we appreciate the council member raising that issue for us. The last note I will make is there was a ghost Exhibit B in the first draft that you received of this. There was conceptually an Exhibit B that was responsive to some council members really feeling like they wanted some rules of etiquette around the council. The recommendation after talking to the rules work group, after talking to a number of the members of the council, is that we'll manage etiquette from the chair, and we will also when we onboard council members, we will make sure that we share with them what our expectations are for etiquette. This is primarily, remember, we want everybody to respect each other's roles on this. In some cases, folks on this council are expected to speak for a particular constituency. It is not personal, so and this has not been a problem in many years. But it is one of those holdover items. So there was originally an Exhibit B The decision was that is probably best managed in a case-by-case situation, particularly by the chair in a live environment. Exhibit B was removed. There was a reference to Exhibit B in the first draft that you received, which is why you received a second draft. It was just a ghost reference to Exhibit B. Okay? So that's our presentation on the rules, on the proposed rules. There are 2 open items that are all ready for discussion, so I'll push those to the front, and then we'll take general discussion from everybody both in the room and on the phone. First off, does anyone have a problem with the procedural clarification to make sure that the language representing majority is consistent between both documents? So I don't see any hands to speak either way on that in the room. On the phone, does anyone have any big concerns about that or feelings that we need to correct it in a different way? Okay. Hearing none. The bigger issue that we had raised for discussion, so if possible, we'd like to start discussion there and then open it up generally. The bigger issue is the item of presentations being limited to 7 minutes, whether that is appropriate, whether that needs more flexibility. So our hope is to have it as discussion first, and then if it does need an amendment, we'll consider either Jackie's language as a proposed amendment, or we'll consider other language from the council. So let's open it up for discussion first on that particular item, on the item of presentations being limited to 7 minutes. Are there any speakers who would like to participate on either side of that discussion? Jackie?
Well, since I made the proposal, I would just like to recommend some flexibility. I think there may be times when there are very convoluted or arcane proposals that may require additional time. So I thought some flexibility built into that might be required. Not all times, but I thought the chair should have some flexibility to grant an extension of time when necessary. It may not always be necessary, but when necessary, and it should be discretionary. I think you can tell when some additional time might be necessary. You see a lot of these. And if requested in advance, this shouldn't be something that should be done on the fly. When the proposal goes in with the agenda materials, you can tell from looking at it if additional time will be required. Grant up to 10 minutes, because as you said, the other side is going to be requesting time as well. So 10 and 10, or the other side may not need the additional time. It depends. So 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes, I think might be appropriate. And I did suggest language, but that's not cast in stone. There may be better language that can be suggested.
Well, and we really appreciate you drafting the language and starting the discussion off. I think one of the questions is, right now it creates flexibility to 10 minutes. Is the intention to create flexibility or only flexibility bounded by the 10 minutes?
No, it's just to create flexibility.
So it could actually say the chair may grant extensions for additional time if that's appropriate.
Sure.
Right? Okay. Other comments and feedback? Paul, I see you in the room, and then I want to make sure we make space for folks on the phone also. Yep. Okay. So I am going to ask, particularly for folks in the room, since you're wearing masks, if you can make sure you get right up on the mic so that's, but Paul, I can recap. It sounded like your feeling was very much in the vein of having flexibility, but not necessarily having it be bounded, have it be real flexibility if it's appropriate. Great. Anybody on the phone? Dan, are you seeing any feedback in the chat also as anybody who wants to speak? No. Okay. Anybody else in the room on this one particular subject? Okay. It sounds like there is some general move towards flexibility. So I think what we're going to do is open discussion up, and then at the end of that, we'll talk about an amendment to the proposed rules that offers that flexibility. Okay? So let's open the floor to any discussion on any topic about either the main document or Exhibit A. In the room, any additional feedback? Okay. How about on the phone?
Sean, this is Sean Cullinane. I do have a question or two, if I may.
Sure.
And it may not be directly related to this, but it kind of pops in my head when I'm following along. The council itself is made up of 21, a maximum of 21 members. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the makeup of the council is defined by State Finance Law 161.
Okay. Do we currently have 21 members? I think not. Am I wrong on that?
I'm looking, you can't see it, but I'm looking in panic across to my staff. They're telling me no, but do we know how many are seated?
Something tells me 18 with several alternates.
You got to the same number the staff in the room got to, Sean. Yes, there are currently 18, and it looks like there are a couple of additional opportunities for appointments to be made. I would have to look also. The appointments are many of the appointments are made for a period of time, but they remain holdover appointments if they're not replaced. So we can get you that number also, but there are 18 currently seated.
Okay, that leads to the next question then. Since we only have 18, is that 11 number still hold? If we only have 18 members, do we still need 11 for majority and for...
Yes, we do, because it is required by the statute that it is, majority is defined as more than 50% of all of the members eligible to be seated on the council.
So if we have only 18, it still has to be 11 as far as the passage of motions, et cetera.
Yep, so Mark Hiller has provided me general construction law to read from. Where am I supposed to start here, Mark? Oh, for the purpose. Okay. So the language reads, for the purpose of this provision, the words whole number shall be construed to mean the total number which the board, commission, body, or other group of persons or officers would have were there no vacancies and were none of the persons or officers disqualified from acting. So that language identifies that it is very much about the fact that the council has 21 seats on it. So in any given situation, even if a council member had to recuse themselves for conflict or was not seated, they are assumed to be part of the count in order to establish majority.
Okay, that answers my questions. Thank you.
Yep.
That's why it's important that you attend.
Sorry, Jackie, did you have
That's
something?
why it's important that you attend.
Right. Strong subtext of thank you for attending the meeting. And Sean, if you need copies of any of that, we're happy to provide that also.
No problem. Thank you.
Yep. Go ahead. Sorry, could you turn your mic on if it's not on?
Do you have any background on where they came up with the 7 minutes? Seems like an...
Yeah, so I think OGS had a real influence in that 7 minutes when in it being presented, and that was really about thinking about many of the voting items that have come before this council have been preferred source items. and they require 3 separate speakers, each of which would have been given that amount of time. So it really worked out to be that is potentially 21 minutes of presentations before discussion in a council meeting that is normally scheduled for an hour and a half or 2 hours. It was purely mathematical. We're certainly not emotionally attached to it in any way, but it was really just if any one presentation could take up 25% or more of the meeting, that becomes pretty significant. So that it was literally just math. But we're open, if this, we'll talk about the language of this amendment in a minute. We expect we probably will support the amendment. Any other comment or feedback on that? No. Any other comment or feedback on any subject across the board? Okay. So, hearing none, I think, Jackie, you have great language. Is it okay if we use that as the jumping off point for an amendment?
Sure.
Okay. So, the amendment would basically say that we would, well, it would say, it wouldn't basically say, it would say that we would strike the language for section 4, Roman numeral 3, presentations will be limited to 7 minutes, and potentially replace it with language that says presenters should limit presentations to 7 minutes. However, the chair may grant extensions of time as appropriate upon 14 days advance request from the presenter. So here's how this works. We haven't had actionable activity like this in front of the council in a while, so we always like to review how this would work. We currently have a main motion for consideration, which is the rules. As part of that, we're in discussion on that. There is now a proposed amendment on the table. That amendment will need a first and a second to bring that forward. We would then only to go into discussion on the amendment. When we were finished discussing the amendment, we could make modifications to the amendment during that process. We would vote on the amendment. If the amendment was passed, it would then be brought back into the main document and would become part of the main document that we would be voting on at the end of this process. Okay? Any questions about procedure or process? Okay. So I'm comfortable making the motion to amend as read. Is there a second to that motion? Paul. Okay. So with a second, there is now an amendment on the table, and we're going to take discussion, pros and cons, questions, etc., about the amendment. The amendment currently reads, presenters should limit presentations to 7 minutes. However, the chair may grant extensions of time as appropriate upon 14 days advance request from the presenter. Got it. I've been asked to clarify that the request that it would be 14 days advance request to the chair from the presenter. Essentially, let staff know, let the chair know that you want extra time so that we have the opportunity to make accommodation there. So, in terms of discussion, I made the amendment. I'm the chair. I love flexibility. It's great. Thank you. At the end of the day, I think Jackie makes a really important point about us not artificially confining discussion based on a timeline, but really allowing it to be the right length while still having the ability, and the chair still has the ability to bound a presentation so it is not circular for 50 minutes or does not occupy 90% of the time the council has allocated for participation in this meeting. So I thought it made great sense, Jackie. That's why I made the motion. I know you had proposed the original language. Do you have anything else you want to add to the discussion?
Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else in the room first? Any discussion or comment? Okay. On the phone or on the WebEx? Any discussion at all?
Hey, Sean, it's Tom Hipshin again.
Yep.
I got the sense from when Jackie was talking that maybe we want to give the chair some flexibility during the presentation as well to extend. Did I misunderstand what you were saying, Jackie?
I wanted to allow the chair flexibility to extend it in advance, not during the presentation, in advance.
Oh, okay.
In advance.
All right, fine.
Thank you.
And Sean, would you like to be able to extend if for any, because right now, the way it's written, you have to do it 15 prior to, but if during the presentation something happens, you can't extend it, right? That's the way it's written.
Right. So I do think it's really important for us to have speakers be efficient and be effective when they present to the council. So there is some limited, discretion of the chair that has to be applied equally to all speakers, but certainly not cutting a person off in the middle of their sentence or not allowing them to finish a final thought. That is not something that is part of the expectation or the etiquette here. We're not going to gavel a person out.
No, I understand that. I know it's not like
but the idea
presidential debate. You got the red light goes on. But I was just wondering if
that doesn't work either. So
I know. I was just trying to figure out if it would be helpful to have some language in there. If there was some extenuating circumstance, it doesn't allow you, unless there are some, I'm not aware of some other authority that you could use. I just wondering if we needed to have an escape clause, that's all.
Yep. So I don't know if an amendment that would make the chair all powerful in all things is probably ideal, but thank you for the idea.
No.
I think, from the chair's perspective, this is about the prepared presentation. And I know there's other additional comments in response to you, Tom, so we'll do that in a second. This is about the prepared presentation. There is no specific time limit on the opportunity for the sponsor of an initiative to have to answer questions, to give more clarity, to provide that information. The only requirement we've put in is that no council member can completely monopolize the question and inquiry time without allowing other folks the opportunity to participate. So if a presentation was allowed to go 10 or even 12 minutes long, and then the council had 45 minutes worth of questions, there would be no limit into the types of questions and inquiries that could be brought. The critical component is that the person making the presentation knew in advance, knew what their expectations were, provided time, and met generally with that timeline, because that then respects the role of the council to be able to ask questions and do those things. So I think from our perspective, there is a fair amount of flexibility in the rest of the process. Should we really get into it? I mean, and I hope there's an excitement to bring issues that could possibly raise this issue to the council for something that we're going to discuss in that much depth. But the chair could always motion to suspend the rules, right? That there's a procedure to do that that would allow all of the speakers on a particular subject more time. So because there's a procedure and there's also a set of questions and answers that are sort of an unlimited timeline. My answer to you, Tom, would be certainly if the council afforded me that, if I needed that flexibility, I would use it. But I don't know that I need to do that in order to effectively run the meeting or capture the discussion on a subject.
That's
Jackie?
fine with me.
Yeah, I think you captured what I was going to, my input. I think in response to Tom, the presentation itself, the reason I was proposing flexibility was so that all the key points on a complex proposal would be made and that we would have time in advance to do that. But if a critical issue needed to come out, I think you could handle that in the Q&A part of the meeting, and that you would be able to handle that. I have confidence that you would be able to do that, and that, as you said, you wouldn't cut someone off in the Q&A portion.
Right. Yeah, the only point in the rules is to make sure that all council members get to participate in that discussion. So, okay, so that's some feedback on the timing, on the flexibility. Any other input? Any other recommended changes for discussion on the amendment? Okay, I see none in the room. I'm having a pregnant pause for everybody on the phone to make sure there's enough time to unmute. Okay, hearing none, the next action we'll take will be a vote on the amendment. So what we're voting on is to eliminate as written, section 4A, Roman numeral 3, presentations will be limited to 7 minutes, and replace it with presenters should limit presentations to 7 minutes. However, the chair may grant extensions of time as appropriate upon 14 days advance request to the chair from the presenter. A yes vote would replace the language. A no vote would leave the language in the rules as drafted right now. So the easiest way to do this is probably to call the roll. Let me try this first. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye, or if you're in the room, signify by raising your hand. Okay.
Aye. Sorry.
I'm going to wait a second if folks are unmuting.
Aye.
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 Okay. It sounds like there is by voice vote that there is a majority. So what we're going to do is clarify if there are any no votes or abstentions. Please understand that if you do not unmute and identify yourself affirmatively as a no vote or an abstention, we're assuming in the voice vote that you were a yes. Okay? So all not in favor, please either signify in the room or unmute and indicate that. Okay. Hearing none, are there any abstentions? Okay. Hearing none, the amendment passes. The amendment will then be incorporated into the body of the rules. So what sits in front of the council now? Sorry, did someone unmute for a comment or?
Yes.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
we can,
All right.
and now we can't.
No, you can't. I'm having some technical difficulties.
Okay.
I can't hear.
Can you hear me clearly?
We can now, yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. My question is, what is the downside? I guess I'm trying to figure out the downside of being able to ask for more time in real time if the discussion warrants it, even if you weren't able to predict that ahead of time.
So I'm happy to participate in that discussion first and then certainly open it to everyone else. We would view it as, allowing the initial presentation time to be infinitely flexible would not put the onus on the presenter to be prepared and to be limited in the initial presentation or to be efficient in the initial presentation. Because there's no actual limit to the amount of discussion can go on, this is really about capturing the importance of the proposal in the initial presentation. And I think sort of the baggage that some of us come to it with is we have heard presentations go a half hour, 45 minutes, longer than that, where they really didn't need to be. It was more promotional materials than it was content that moved the discussion forward. So I think the limit really is on the limited scope of the initial presentation. The expectation is absolutely that discussion will continue for as long as council members have a view on or a request or need more information. So that is just my response as the chair. Is there anybody else who sees a risk or sees an opportunity that the council is not taking? I don't see any in the room, but I want to make sure. Okay. With that lack of clarity, so that's the discussion part that is we think, at least I think, is responsive to your question.
It does.
But because that question was open, I want to make sure I clarify of whether you're in favor of or against the amendment or would like to abstain.
I'm abstaining.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've heard primarily voice vote yes. We've heard no no's. We've heard one abstention. Is there anyone else on the phone or in the room who believes their vote was not counted correctly? Okay. In the absence of any concerns about that, we understand the amendment to have been approved. That means the item on the table is now the Procurement Council Rules Draft 11420 as amended in Section 4A, Sub-Roman numeral 3, with the language that we just voted on, and Exhibit A with the clarification of using the same language on majority that appears in Voting Rules 2B. The items are currently on the table together unless there's an objection from the room. That item is now still in discussion. Are there any discussions about any more discussion about the Procurement Council rules as amended before moving those to vote? I see none in the room, and oh, sorry, Jackie.
I just want to thank you for eliminating Exhibit B.
I think advice of the Rules Work Group and then advice of some of the other council members we spoke to, it clearly was council members don't need codified etiquette. If an etiquette issue does come up ever in the future again, we'll deal with that separately with the individual member. We agreed with everybody's feedback on that, and we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yep. And we even eliminated every reference to Exhibit B. So it's gone. Doesn't accidentally exist. Any other discussion on any parts of the council rules or Exhibit A for consideration, discussion, or for responding to questions before we call the vote? Okay. Hearing none. So the motion has been, so it has been motioned and seconded. With no more discussion, that means we can go to vote on it. Because it is the main motion, and I don't have a sense of whether a voice vote would be successful or not, I am going to call the roll. I'm going to call the roll of the folks I am positive were on the call at the beginning when I did the quorum call. Then if there are any other council members who have joined late that I don't have in the quorum count, we'll ask for you to participate in that way. As is typical, the chair, abstains on most of these votes unless there's a need for the chair to vote. So, Patty Warrington, Comptroller's Office.
Yes.
Thank you. Division of Budget, Jason.
Yes.
Thank you. Chief Diversity Office, Dwight, I think you're there, or is Lonnie still representing you?
Yes, I'm there.
Great. Are you a yes, no, or abstain?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Lisa Brooks, Ag and Markets. Lisa, if you are on and you can't use your audio for any reason, please use the chat and let us know what your vote would be on this. We'll circle back to you at the end also. Paul? From Docs, great, thank you. DOH, Andy Ruby?
Andy had to leave early. This is Sue Mantica. I'm proxying a yes.
Great, thank you. Elaine? On chat
Yes.
from ITS?
Yes.
You're yes. Great. Thank you. Bill Gwynn, OMH?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. OPWDD, Deborah Greco? Okay. Tom Hipchin, SUNY?
Yes.
Legislative appointee, Cara Wallace?
Yes.
Legislative appointee, Jackie Burling?
Yes.
Okay. Legislative appointee, Sean Cullinane?
Yes.
Okay. Empire State Development, Chris McCann?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, just a last call. Lisa, did you join us or were you able to hear us? Okay, got it. So, sorry? Right, and sorry, Deb Greco, we weren't able to hear you either. Are you still on the line? Okay. Okay. So Deb, if you do want to have a vote recorded on this, if we can't currently hear you, so please use the chat if you are still available. Are there any council members who have joined that were not part of my current roll call through the voting members? Okay. Hearing none, there are 13 yeses in favor of passing the rules. As we've discussed several times, based on our majority requirements, that allows the rules and Exhibit A to pass together. So I want to thank everybody for your diligence in going through that. I also want to make a very specific thank you to the Rules Work Group. This was a lot of work, a lot of different opinions taken into account. It was also a lot of work that happened 2 years ago, so having to get everybody back together to talk about it again, to revisit that, we very much appreciate that. We know everybody understands why we had the gap, but we very much appreciate that. So thank you for everybody who participated in that work group, and just for all the council members, for anybody who provided staff to that work group or you yourself participated. That is a big deal that allows us to successfully move some of these things forward, so thank you for that. Remaining on the agenda is open council discussion, and then we'll close and talk about the meetings next year. I have a couple of items. OGS will be hosting our GovBuy event May 4th and 5th. Next year, we are expecting there to be some remote options, but also for the event to be live. So we're very excited about that, and we do expect to be bringing more information about that at both the January and the April meetings. As a reminder, VetCon is November 30th through December 1st, and the MWBE Forum is December 14th through December 16th. And information about all of those are available on the respective websites. Let me call for additional open council discussion. Are there any other topics council members would like to see raised or discussed today? I see none in the room. Then all call for everybody on the phone. Sort of like an auction, going once, going twice. Okay, hearing none. The Procurement Council has issued scheduled dates for the next meetings next year. It is Wednesday, January 26th, 2022, 11:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And then Tuesday, April 26th, 2022 is the additional date for the next two meetings. Obviously, you'll be getting quorum calls for that. Before I close the meeting, please be aware that the executive order that allows this meeting to be held both in person and remote does currently expire January 15th, which is 11 days before the next Procurement Council meeting. So when we're collecting quorum information, we will be collecting both in-person and remote quorum. We will be assuming until there is further notice that if the executive order is allowed to expire, this meeting will be held in person in the Empire State Plaza, as always. But we will continue to keep council members updated. And certainly if that is extended, we will spend a fair amount of time making sure we communicate with you about how you'll participate in the meeting if you are available for that. Our understanding is there is some discussion around public meetings law and public access to meetings that is unresolved as of yet. So certainly if there are any changes structurally beyond the executive order, we'll share that with everybody in that amount of time. I realize I forgot one additional item. Tom, you asked me a question yesterday that I want to answer for everybody. Tom raised a question about how the federal rules on vaccinating and testing will apply to vendors on different contracts. So there have not been rules specific yet to businesses with over 100 employees. What we would say to everyone is your contracts, we would expect all contracts have language in it that say vendors are required to comply with all of the statutory requirements and regulatory requirements that are imposed on them. Based on that statement, the expectation is if there is a federal mandate that applies to vendors either on centralized contract or applies to agency-specific vendors, that the vendor will be responsible for complying there. Most contracts, and I can't speak for all, but most contracts have options if that creates a burden for vendors and the vendor wants to raise issues on pricing or raise issues on service delivery related to that. Those would be issues that would happen one at a time, and they would probably happen with the owner of the contract. So for centralized contracts, we would expect it to happen, those issues to be raised centrally to OGS. To agency-specific contracts, we would expect that to be raised at the agency level because you would be the owner of the contract. So if there is more information that comes out, certainly we're happy to direct people to it. We don't have any more information than what the federal government has provided yet. So, Tom, I knew you asked the question, but I hope it was okay. I thought it was relevant to answer for everybody.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you, Sean.
Yep. Okay. Seeing no other discussion, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Jason DiGianni, motion to adjourn. Is there a second? You got a second, right? I always mix you up. I'm sorry. I can't see. Just use your microphone and tell everybody that you're seconding.
I second it.
Okay. ITS seconds. Thank you. I apologize. Okay. All in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye, or in the room, you can feel free to raise your hands.
Aye.
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 We just never miss anybody when it's time to adjourn. Everybody unmutes. Okay. Any no votes for adjourning? Any abstentions? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. For those of you that will be celebrating holidays over the next 2 months, we hope you do that safely, and we appreciate your participation this year, and we look forward to seeing you for the January meeting for the Procurement Council. Everybody have a great day and a great week, and hopefully great holidays if we don't get to talk to you.
Bye-bye.